Welcome to the North Star stretcher orientation portion of orientation. My name's Curtis Swindle. I'm the safety director for North Star, and basically we're going to go over the anatomy of a stretcher, some do's and don'ts. To start with, we'll begin with the stretcher straps. All stretchers, to be in service, to make a call, must have a particular set of straps, beginning with a leg strap, a lap strap, a chest strap, and shoulder strap. Pay attention to your straps on your stretcher. Make sure that single straps, which are these, because they only tighten in one direction, as opposed to double-sided straps that will tighten either direction. Single-sided straps always need to be placed on the stretcher where they will tighten to the left side of the stretcher. Purpose for this is for your safety. If you attach your straps to the left side, if during transport with a patient you need to manipulate a strap for any reason, when you're applying it, it keeps you out of the strike zone of the patient when you're adjusting the strap. If these were turned the other way, to be able to tighten, you'd have to lean down, get in the strike zone of the patient. So that's the purpose of putting your straps to the left side. We'll continue with straps. This one's a good example. You'll see that straps can take a lot of damage. This damage here is from the stretcher being rolled with the strap dangling on the ground, and it gets caught under the wheel. So that causes damage to the strap. Now, the way you determine whether a strap is too damaged to be left in service or not is you take the buckle, and basically wherever the frayed or cut portion is, you slide your buckle along it, and if it impedes the function of the buckle in any way, then that's going to answer your question for you. So if it were to impede this buckle and it wouldn't go any further, then remove that strap, throw it away, replace it with a new one. This one's not impeded, so these frays are okay. Next thing we'll show you is, again, continuing with straps. Sometimes for a seat belt, they'll get a little hard to put together. Sometimes when you're clipping it together, it'll feel spongy. Sometimes you won't hear the click so well, so you're wondering, or maybe wondering, is this going bad? Is it bad? So the way to test a buckle to see if it's going bad is to take your shears or your multi-tool. Mine happens to be a Swiss Army knife. Basically, whatever the belt is, you buckle it, flip it over, and hold some tension on the belt. And while holding tension, you take your multi-tool and you're going to strike it right here on the back of the buckle while holding tension. Now, if the spring mechanism is bad in this buckle, when I strike it, it'll come unbuckled. If that's what happens, then again, this answers your question. Your strap's bad, take the whole thing, throw it away, replace it with a new one. Okay, let's talk about stretcher pads for a minute. So, how do you know if a stretcher pad is damaged to the point it needs to be taken out of service? Basically, if you have a small tear, small cut, something that can be patched, it's permissible to patch these pads, but at the point a pad needs patching, you need to report it so that a new one can be ordered, because these are pretty expensive, so they're not generally found in the supply room. They really get ordered when we need one. So at the point you need to start patching a stretcher, report it to the supervisor. Okay, to finish up with stretcher pads these days most often are attached by Velcro. So basically, you can hear it. when you remove the pad. But the main thing is if you're getting resistance, if it's not coming off immediately, stop, because all of them aren't held to the frame by Velcro. Some are held by hooks, and if you really put into it, you'll wind up tearing these pads down the backside. So if it's not coming up with just a little bit of pressure, take a moment and look under your stretcher and see how it needs to be removed, because these aren't very hard to tear. All right. Next part is the plating of the stretcher. The plating of the stretcher gives strength to it. This plating is held in by aluminum rivets. These rivets are actually designed to give way and pop if the stretcher is overstressed. And the purpose is so that the rivets can be replaced and the stretcher doesn't have or wind up with permanent damage. So it's designed to fail. If your stretcher has a couple of rivets missing, that's not a big deal, report it. However, if your plating, when you check your stretcher, if your plating is loose, then that stretcher needs to be taken out of service. Okay, now we're going to talk about stretcher controls a little bit. So as a general rule, most stretcher controls are color-coded with red. So the cool thing about that is when you have untrained lifting help, kind of a shortcut in giving them a crash stretcher course is to tell them if it's red, don't touch it. Because if it's red, it'll cause an action. So for those of y'all that have never used a stretcher before, you can see that if you take a moment to look, you'll find a lot of things that are red. So here, if I squeeze this, it's going to cause an action which breaks down the back of the stretcher. That's to help you assist you in homes when going through hallways into like bedrooms. But again, on each side, if you squeeze it, it causes an action. Same thing with the backrest. If I squeeze it, it's going to result in an action happening. So here for the handrails, red, you squeeze it, it causes an action. This handle here is the same as the foot handle for raising and lowering the stretcher. This handle allows you to operate it when you're using lifting assistance. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then here's the regular foot end, upper and lower, depending on your height preference. And then, of course, the Trendelenburg position, which is this here. Again, red causes an action. Same for the wheels. Most stretchers today have one wheel brake. It's colored red. So if you apply the wheel brake or push it, it causes an action. Locks the stretcher. Main thing about the wheel brake is just remember the wheel brake is only ever to be used when a patient's not on the stretcher. It cannot be used when you have a patient on it. Now the side rail, what I want you to know about the side rails are okay when you have a patient on the stretcher. It's okay to roll the stretcher and use the side rails with you and your partner. It's okay to use the side rails to assist in rolling the stretcher. However, the side rails are not designed for you to lift the stretcher by them. Now, most certainly, don't misunderstand me. I promise you, you could lift this stretcher with a patient on it several times using the side rails, but not many times. And when it fails, it's going to come off and everybody's going onto the floor. So never use the side rails for lifting the stretcher. It's okay to use them to guide the stretcher, not lift. Okay, now we're going to talk about accessories for stretchers. Accessories, in particular, we're talking about accessories that come with the stretcher from the factory, common accessories. This head padding is not what I would call a common accessory. It doesn't generally always come from the manufacturer. It's usually an aftermarket item you buy. But IV poles, on the other hand, such as this here, are standard on stretchers. So what I'm going to tell you about accessories is you don't have to use an accessory. If you're a person that, say, for whatever reason, I don't like the IV poles, well, you know, that's fine. Maybe you say you don't like them because they always break or whatever. But it's okay. If you don't like a particular accessory on a stretcher, just simply don't use it. You don't have to use it. Many stretchers come with an O2 caddy down here at the foot for the small O2 tanks. A lot of people say, you know, I'm not comfortable carrying my O2 down here because if we, you know, go around a corner and shear the gauge off, we're going to have trouble. That's fine. You don't have to use it. But here's what you can't do with accessories. You can't decide that you dislike an accessory so much that you're going to break the toolbox out and remove it. You cannot remove an existing accessory that comes from the manufacturer. And here's why you can't. Accessories, if you'll look here, you'll see that accessories most often are built in to the frame. So if you remove these accessories, you're actually going to weaken the frame. So that's a safety issue. So the best I can tell you for accessories is, again, you don't have to like it. If you don't like it, that's fine. Just simply don't use it. But you can't remove it. Now we're going to talk about pinch points. This is a newer stretcher. Just to show you, classically, there is a pinch point on the backrest of a stretcher. Usually this backrest would come out to here, and there would be a knob here that meets here so that when you lower it, it would create a pinch point that could actually break your finger. They've reduced this and engineered out the pinch point, which is great. However, unfortunately, all pinch points cannot be engineered out. And as you can see, the stretcher will try to warn you. This warns you of a pinch point. Now, anytime you see any labels notifying you of a pinch point, pay very special attention to them, because these two particular pinch points have the ability in the right circumstance to remove a finger. These pinch points, when the stretcher is lowered to ground level, that is, when the carriage is totally collapsed, these pinch points are going to rest right on top of these bolts. So it's going to be steel to steel. And if you have a 600-pound patient on that stretcher, you can imagine how that's probably going to end up feeling. So be aware of pinch points, not only for yourself, but for anybody that helps you use the stretcher. Make sure that they never grab the stretcher in a location that's going to end up in a pinch point. The other thing is the pull bar. Now, I bet most of you don't even know that that's what this bar is called. It usually is on all new stretchers, and then usually after a couple of months it's missing, or you've probably noticed commonly it's broken on there. Well, the reason that is this is just simply a hollow aluminum tube. This is not meant to carry any weight in any fashion. The purpose of this bar is not for lifting, because just like the handrails, it doesn't have the structure to take it. It's not for pulling a patient on the stretcher, because again, it's hollow and it's aluminum. It's not made for it. It's not strong enough. What this bar is for is when one person is operating the stretcher, such as you're working a wreck, there's extensive extrication, going to be a while till you're ready for the stretcher, because right now it would just be in the way. Well, you get to the point where you're ready for the stretcher, so you go get it, but only one person's available to go get it. You got to weave around debris in cars. Well, with this pull bar, this is actually here to help you steer the stretcher. With this pull bar, the front of this stretcher kind of turns into a needle. You can precisely turn it and control it with wherever you need to go, as opposed to trying to handle a stretcher this way on uneven terrain, and it's pulling this way, and you get around here but you hit a car with the back of it, or you know, whatever the case may be. That's the purpose of this bar, and that's why it comes up as high as it does, to give you leverage to really have control of the stretcher as one person moving it. Let's talk about weight limits. Weight limits for stretchers, generally somewhere on the stretcher, usually in multiple places, you'll find something that labels what the stretcher is rated for. This one would be 600 pounds or 272 kilograms. So here's the question. If this stretcher is weighted or rated for 600 pounds, can we carry a 700-pound man on it? Well, that depends. It depends on whether this 700-pound man is a general BLS non-emergent transfer, or whether this is an emergency call or emergency situation. So here's what I want you to know about weight limits. Weight limits matter. Weight limits apply. But in an emergency situation, if we were on the scene of an emergency call and the man weighed 700 pounds, we're going to put him on this stretcher as best we can. We're going to secure him as best we can with every effort for safety that we can apply, and we're going to transport, because you know, you don't die because you're 100 pounds over the weight limit for the stretcher. You know, this is an emergency, this is a life-saving situation. Now, however, if this is a transport, say, to a doctor's office, and turns out the gentleman weighs 700 pounds, well, the manufacturer's telling us that they're rating this stretcher for 600, which means after 600 they're making no guarantees, which means it's not safe. And we know it's not safe, and there is no extenuating circumstance that warrants taking such a risk to take the 700-pound man to the doctor on this stretcher. So we're not going to take that risk. This is not a life-saving situation. This is a safety situation, and we're going to do it the safe way. So in a non-emergent context, we're not going to transport a 700-pound man on this stretcher. We're going to take the time to find a bariatric transport so that the man can be transported safely. Okay. We're going to discuss stretcher positions. This position where the foot is lower than the head, kind of cocked down, this is called the loading position of the stretcher. The purpose of this position is to aid when loading the patient into the back of the ambulance or unloading. So the front being up higher aids in these wheels rolling into the back of the ambulance. So basically it just aids in loading and unloading. So the other thing I want you to know about the loading position is, fully extended, the loading position has a high center of gravity. So this is one of the reasons we tell everyone, once you have a patient on board this stretcher, never roll this stretcher sideways with a patient on it. Now, I'm not talking about we need to turn and go over here or over there. If you need to turn, pivot. You and your partner get on each side and pivot. You know, what we're talking about rolling to the side is you have a patient on here secured and you're just literally rolling. For one, you never roll a patient in the loading position because, as I said, the center of gravity is at its highest. So in the loading position, if you have a patient on here and you move this stretcher sideways for any reason, it only takes just a small pebble under one of these wheels while you're moving, and that small pebble will scotch that wheel. And because the center of gravity is so high, because this is in the loading position, that little pebble will tip this stretcher over with very little effort. So never, ever roll a patient in the loading position. Okay, the next stretcher position is what's known as the transport position. I'm going to use the side rail here. You go down 2 clicks. 2 clicks and the stretcher is perfectly horizontal. So a perfectly horizontal 2 clicks down stretcher is called the transport position. So whenever you have a patient on board the stretcher and you're going to be rolling them, when you begin to roll, they must be in the transport position, not the loading position. Again, loading position is the highest center of gravity position. By going from the loading position to the transport position, it lowers the center of gravity 30%. So it's a major advantage to bring your patient down to the transport level, and then it's all right to move the patient. Now, if we were, for whatever reason, have to turn, or for a short period go sideways, if we were to catch that same pebble we were talking about earlier, in the transport position, the center of gravity is so low, you're more likely to run over the pebble or crush whatever it is you're rolling over than you are to be scotched and tipped over. So the purpose of the transport position is for total safety purposes. It is the safest thing for the patient. As far as the crew goes, it does lower the stretcher where you're used to holding here and maybe rolling through the hospital. Well, you know, now, and you've been using the backrest anyway, but there's nothing wrong with using the backrest when rolling and the handrails. So the partner on the side is not going to have to bend down here and grab the frame. As I told you earlier, it's perfectly permissible to roll a patient using the handrails. Lifting help. Sometimes you get on scene and you get a patient who is too large for 2 crew members to manipulate. So you need lifting help. Sometimes that lifting help is going to be untrained. It may be people on the scene. It may be able-bodied family members that you enlist to help lift. It's important when using untrained lifting help that you put them in the proper location, the safest location for assisting you in lifting the stretcher. Now, unfortunately, some crews get very complacent. Over the years, they're used to handling a stretcher as a 2-person crew, so from end to end is basically how they accomplish 95% of what they do. The bad part of that is when it comes to lifting help, sometimes it feels natural to have your lifting help get on each side of the stretcher, and the crew identifies control of the stretcher as from end to end, where normally that's true when it's just the 2 crew members. When you're using lifting help, that changes everything. If you're using lifting help, the position of control for the stretcher becomes side to side. And this is why. So if a crew member's here and a crew member's here, untrained person here and here, well, when we go to lift, for whatever reason, if the untrained person slips and falls or lifts too much, just through the laws of physics, there's nothing you and your partner can do because it's a leverage thing. If they do something wrong on the side, there is a fail point in turning the stretcher over where you can't recover. So one, the patient's going to get injured, and whoever was helping lift likely is going to get injured too. Point is as a crew, it's hard for you to have, you cannot have absolute control of your stretcher end to end when using lifting help. So when using lifting help, your lifting help needs to be end to end. Because think about it, what's the worst thing that can happen with your lifting help? Either they lift too high. If they lift too high, then the guy's feet went in the air. Nobody got hurt. If he lift too high on that end, the guy's head went in the air. No one got hurt. If they trip and fall, they fell on his feet. Vice versa. Point is, no one gets hurt end to end because you and your partner have ultimate control of the stretcher. So when using lifting help, never give them the position of control for your stretcher, which is side to side. You and your partner always maintain that. That's exactly why this red handrail is put here by the manufacturer. The purpose of this side carriage handle is for when you are using untrained lifting help, the crew can remain in control of the stretcher. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the position for inspecting your stretcher. This position I'm going to show you allows you to see everything at once, where here you can't, particularly if you had your stretcher pad and everything still on here. So this is called the inspection position. What you're going to do is you're going to raise the backrest up just a little bit, and then you're going to pick the stretcher up, let it go to the ground, and then you're going to pick it up again. Let it go to the backrest. So this is the inspection position. In this position, I can see everything about this stretcher. So if there's any obvious damage, it's easy for me to see it. If something's bent, broken, if there's nuts, screws, bolt, lock rings, fasteners missing, it's easy to see them. I can see all my springs. And in this position, you just inspect all the joints. And what you're looking for is just damage, such as the welds. You check all welded locations to make sure there's no cracks in the welds. Areas that are welded tend to take the most stress. That's why they're welded. So basically this position just gives me a total overlook of the stretcher. Okay, we're almost done. Wheels, casters, bearings. When you're in the inspection position, this is the best time to check them. So basically the casters have a set of bearings in them, and then you've also got a set of bearings here that turn the wheel. So the way you're going to check your bearings is you're just going to give it a spin, and what you're listening for is if you hear a roaring sound, if it's just audible that you can hear the roaring, then that means the bearings are getting worn. You need to put that on your check sheet. It doesn't mean it necessarily can't remain in service unless it's just really roaring and won't spin but a time or two. But these, as you can tell, are not making sound, so we're real satisfied with these bearings. They're in very good shape. And then again, these you check the same way. You just give it a spin, And if they're bad, you're going to hear a roaring noise. So that's what we're hoping not to have. And again, if you do have that roaring noise, then report it on your check sheet. Let a supervisor know. And it'll get put on the list when the stretcher vendor comes around to do their servicing, just to make sure that, you know, they don't miss it. That concludes the North Star stretcher orientation video. Just remember, just to recap, transport position, head lower than the feet. Never ever roll a patient in the loading position. 2 clicks down puts you in the transport position. That is what you always use to roll patients around with. Handrails, okay for guiding the stretcher, never for lifting. Belts, required. Shoulder belts are required. Chest belt with the shoulder belt. Lap belt, leg belt. If all of these belts are not present on the stretcher cannot be placed in service. Hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something maybe you didn't know. Thank you for attending.